Well, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Law Society. It's tremendous to see so many people here, particularly some of the junior lawyers. My name is Jonathan Smithers. I'm the president of the Law Society of England and Wales. We're here today to celebrate the London Technology Week and our contribution towards that, our conference on robots and lawyers, a partnership for the future. As I say, this conference is part of our thought leadership programme on a series looking at technology as a driver for change in the legal profession. Our hashtag for this evening, it's up on the screen there, I think. It was up on the screen. It's up on the screen. It's up on the screen now. There we are. If you use that, please, you'll see there are tweet walls around. If you use that, you may see your tweets appearing there. So please do get involved, do tweet, and send us questions for the panel later on if you have any. I hope that you were able to participate in the interactive poll during registration. I'll announce the results right at the end, so worth staying just for hearing that, of course, provided the technology works. So tonight, our conference is going to focus on the legal effects of the use of artificial intelligence, on machine learning and technology in the law and in legal practice. And we have a really impressive lineup of speakers to address these topics. You're going to hear from the makers of artificial intelligence technology, starting with Dale Lane from IBM Watson, Andy Wright from BAE Systems. You're going to hear from solicitors, from Peter Wright from Digital Law, who is also chair of the Law Society's Technology and Law Reference Group, and of course, from me. And we're also going to hear from an academic, from Professor Katie Atkinson from the University of Liverpool. And after we've heard all the speakers, we're going to have some questions and answers up on the stage. So as I say, please hold your questions ready, tweet them if you'd like, because I can take some from the tweet wall, and we can come to those later on. And because I'm the host, I have the privilege of starting off with my presentation. My talk this evening is going to focus on robots and lawyers bound by the rule of law. Are you human? And when did you become you? Can you be rebuilt? Technology could fix you. It could enhance you. It could even save you. Titanium plates and screws can reconstruct entire bones after life-threatening accidents or injuries. Animals can give you new organs. Just a few weeks ago, researchers at the University of California developed a chimera, a pig-human embryo, in order to be capable of growing replacement organs for humans. Computer-assisted limbs and technology can improve the quality of our life. Surgeons at Moorfields Eye Hospital believe that the technology is available to replace the eye's degenerated photoreceptors with a bionic eye that has an embedded camera. All of these things are promising, so we can really say that technology is lending us a hand. But after we've been fixed, or we've been enhanced, or we've been saved by technology, are you still you? As technology develops, it aids us. We're becoming more than ourselves. Perhaps we're becoming, in one sense, more than human. And if that's the case, is the law ready for us? Is it fit for the future? I want to turn first to history to see if we can answer that question. Under Roman law, which of course had a very strong influence on the development of the law in England and Wales, the concept of a legal person was restricted to free men over the age of 25 who were Roman citizens. In 12th century England, married couples had something called coverture, which meant they were considered as one financial entity. What that meant was that women could not own property, own businesses, could not access the courts. That was also the case in the legal profession. Women were not considered as persons within the meaning of the Solicitors Act of 1843. We all know that situation has now changed very radically. Common law evolved, it adapted, and it transformed to ensure that it reflected changes in society. The Sex Disqualification Act was passed in 1919. Women were then allowed to practice law, the first solicitor being admitted in 1922. Women over 21 were given the right to vote in 1928. The concept of legal person has been extended in the law to less traditional entities as well. Around the world, legislators and courts have given legal persona and the rights that go with it to companies, to indigenous communities, to ships, to animals, and even to holy books. On companies, for example, this jurisdiction led the way. The principle of corporate personality developed by our courts dates from 1897. The original case involved a leather worker, Mr. Salomon. He turned his sole trader business into a company with members of his family as shareholders. Eventually, the company folded, it ceased to trade, and some of the trade creditors were not paid, so they took a case against Mr. Salomon. The courts ruled that he could not be held liable for the company's debts. That case set a precedent for the principle of separate identity, what we often refer to as the veil of incorporation. And legislators have taken the concept of corporate persona one step further. They can make companies criminally liable. Under the Corporate Manslaughter Act 2007, companies can be accountable for management failings right across the organisation. And internationally, the principle also applies. In the United States, the courts have ruled that the 14th Amendment to the Constitution, referring to the rights of citizens, the word person can be extended to corporations, which gives them a degree of constitutional protection. Under international law, companies have legal standing to file claims against sovereign states, to challenge government, affecting their investments. Animals and the environment have also been considered the subject of rights as well. In Switzerland, animals have constitutional status. Animal welfare has that. Similarly, a judge in the Supreme Court of Manhattan granted a writ of habeas corpus to 2 chimpanzees that were involved in scientific research, effectively recognizing them as legal persons. Now, the judgment was changed later on, but it perhaps shows the development of thinking where it might go in the future. In 2012, the Whangarei River in New Zealand was recognized as a person that could own its own riverbed in an agreement between the Maori peoples and the Crown. The rights of nature and Mother Earth are recognised with constitutional protection in Ecuador and in Bolivia. So the avenues for rights and redress used to be narrow, but they have been getting steadily wider. Now, that expansion does not necessarily mean, of course, that robots will be recognised as legal persons or that they will automatically have rights. The European Parliament, through its research committee, has started to explore this and has asked this question. Should there be a new category to describe robots similar to other legal categories such as natural persons, legal persons, animals, or objects? But before that question can be answered, I think it's essential that the law considers the legal effects on the current uses of machine learning technology. There really are increased pressures on developers and companies to make new forms of technology available quickly. There's shareholder pressure, consumer pressure. They need to maximize the commercial revenue quickly. But that brings risks. It brings greater risks. And those risks have to be identified before they can be mitigated. And we've already seen the effects of the usage. Microsoft created Tay, as was widely reported, a chatbot designed to interact via Twitter with the younger generation of millennials, that's not referring to myself clearly, to improve its conversational skills through machine learning. Within hours of it going live, the company, it was reported, had to shut it down. Again, reported, as one read in the newspapers, that Tay had issued inappropriate tweets, likening cancer to feminism and denying the Holocaust. Apparently, those had been learnt by the programme through interaction with other people. A couple of months ago, a police investigation was launched into a drone allegedly crashing into a British Airways plane over Heathrow Airport, believed to be the first case of its kind. Significant amounts of the cryptocurrency Bitcoin have been stolen, apparently to fund, or supposedly to fund, terrorist activities around the globe. And everyone here will know, because the Chancellor of the Exchequer announced it, we're going to have driverless cars in England next year, in 2017. They may be available on our streets, again, the Chancellor of the Exchequer has announced, by 2020. Earlier this year, again, widely reported that a Google car crashed with a bus in California. Instances where that's happened before, but this was apparently the first time when it was the fault of the Google driverless car. It caused the collision. So, for the lawyers, there are many questions on each of these instances on tort liability, and they need to be answered if we are to use these forms of technology. The European Parliament again has raised 3 points. Firstly, what's the legal responsibility arising from a robot's harmful actions? Secondly, what's the effect of a robot developing autonomous and cognitive features? That question might cover, for example, where the robot becomes an agent by interacting with the environment and changing that environment. Thirdly, how can a machine be held responsible, wholly or partly, for its acts or omission? Now, each of those questions are very important, and I would suggest have to have the involvement of lawyers to answer them if there will be sound, robust and evidence-based answers developed as technology itself is developing. So, in summary, the law is adapting, it's transforming, and it's evolving to meet the needs of the modern world. The new uses of machine learning and artificial intelligence show that technology has evolved from science fiction to science fact. But we cannot be complacent. Unless we keep up with the pace of technology, unless we show leadership and take action in this field, unless we show determination and imagination in this sector, our legal system may not be fit for the future. Machine learning and artificial intelligence may not strictly be human, but its uses, its applications, its results must still be subject to the rule of law. It's up to us as the lawyers, as the guardians of the rule of law, as we have been for many hundreds of years, to ensure that this happens. There is a pressing need for the legal profession to look at the future, to anticipate tomorrow's needs, to contribute towards the development of whatever legal measures are necessary. The time to act is now. Lawyers and robots need to work together as a partnership for the future. We must ensure that technology remains our ally, not our rival. Never a threat, always an opportunity. Thank you.
Hello. Right, thank you. Yes, my name is Dale. I'm a developer for IBM and I work on a system called Watson. And I've been asked this evening to talk to you about the state of artificial intelligence. This is something I could talk about for hours, but I don't have hours, I have 10 minutes. So instead, it's going to be a whistle-stop tour. What I want to do is to pick out three aspects, three essential points that I think are important for understanding where we are now and where I think we're going. Click, come on. There we go. I mentioned that I work on a system called Watson. Now, Watson is famous, in the United States at least, because of a demo we did in 2011. We entered it as a contestant on a TV quiz show. It had to be able to understand some of the complex and cryptic questions you get on the TV quiz show Jeopardy. And it had to be able to give specific, accurate answers quicker than the two best players to have ever played the game. Now, there was a lot to unpack in that demo. It represented a number of breakthroughs in natural language processing, in machine learning, in artificial intelligence. But the key takeaway for me was it was a vision of the future. It was an insight into how we might interact with computers in the future. Even within the constraints of a TV quiz show, what we were showing was the possibility for how we could interact with computers when they start to have some understanding of the questions that we ask. Let me show you an example of what I mean. This is the kind of question that came up. Of the 4 countries in the world the US doesn't like, which one is furthest north? Now, the answer is North Korea. Some of you look puzzled. Think of what's involved in answering this question, because there's 2 parts to the question. There's a political question of which 4 countries in the world doesn't the US like, but after you've done that bit, there's a geographical, spatial question around which of those 4 is furthest north. Think of what you're used to when you use stuff like search to interact with computers, to interact with information. For this to work, you would need, really, someone would need to have written about this before. They would have needed to have used these words or words a lot like these to describe North Korea. They would have had to have written about North Korea being the most northern of all the countries the US doesn't have relations with. Because realistically, a search for documents that contain the words for countries, United States, diplomatic, probably not going to help. So what this was showing was the potential for when systems start to have some understanding of the meaning behind our questions. And not just the questions, but the documents it's going to look for answers in as well. Because the Jeopardy would ask questions on any topic under the sun. So it wouldn't have been practical for us to try and preempt the questions and to manually prepare the answers to look up in. So instead, Watson had to extract a usable knowledge from documents. Documents written for use by people. Not documents specifically for computers, not documents specifically for a quiz show. It had to be able to use encyclopedias and dictionaries like Wikipedia and Encarta and the OED. It had to be able to use newspapers and magazines like the New York Times and Time magazine. It had to be able to use books like the works of Shakespeare. That was the other key thing we were showing was the possibilities for human-computer interaction when systems start to have some understanding of the meaning in all the documents that we're producing every day. And it also showed how we create these systems and how we're going to create these systems in the future, because we didn't give it the rules to follow. We didn't tell it, here are the steps to generate an answer for this quiz show. Instead, Watson had to learn how to do the job of playing the quiz show through experiences. The starting point was all of the questions from the previous show. So going back to the 60s, it was able to play every Jeopardy show that had ever been played. But after that, it would play sparring matches against other champions, previous champions of the show. And it was through those experiences that it learnt when to use which of the different strategies we'd given it. It learnt how to identify and how to tackle the different types of questions based on the questions that it had encountered before. It learnt how to use the knowledge that it has extracted from the documents that we've given it based on the experiences it had in the past. This is what we were showing, and this is the future that we're starting to see now, arriving really, this idea of computers that we learn, that we teach. This idea that a human expert is able to impart some of their expertise, even if it's in something like a quiz show, into a system by giving it those examples. Now, I said that the quiz show was 2011. Fast forward to today, and how are we using this kind of technology? Well, one of the main uses has been in healthcare. Particularly in cancer care, in oncology. You're starting to see doctors and nurses using this in the diagnosis and treatment of cancers, albeit at a small scale today. But if you look at what this means, it's the same basic idea. I mean, the documents are different. Instead of using encyclopedias and dictionaries, now it's using medical textbooks and research papers and treatment guidelines and doctor's notes. And instead of answering trivia questions, it's answering questions around the diagnosis and treatment of illnesses. But that idea of what is possible when we have a system that has some understanding of our questions and some understanding of the meaning in this massive number of documents, and what does that enable in terms of the interaction between us and information and us and systems. I said that I wanted to highlight 3 points. This is the first, that these systems are getting smarter. They're getting better at understanding us. Now, Jonathan mentioned sort of sci-fi before. It's worth mentioning, when I say understanding, what do I mean? I'm not talking about a human level of understanding, not yet, but enough of an understanding to have a real impact on the way we interact with the system and the way we interact with information. And this stuff is starting to trickle down. We are starting to see it all around us. Google announced their Home device earlier this year, that thing in the top left. And Amazon, only in the States for now, but they have this device called the Echo that you can buy today. These are both fascinating examples of what's possible in human-computer interaction when you have a system that knows you, that can hear you, that can understand you. Jonathan mentioned chatbots before. Yes, Tay is a high-profile example of where it went wrong, but there are lots of examples of it going right. Facebook today are starting to enable bots in their messenger platform. Bots that are based artificial intelligence systems that Facebook users are able to interact with. Artificial intelligence that is answering questions on behalf of the brands and companies that people come to find on Facebook. And the bottom left one, Hilton Hotels are starting to experiment with Connie the robot concierge. They're training to answer questions and make recommendations to the guests in their hotel. So we're starting to see this promise of how we're going to interact with systems all around us even now. This stuff used to be tremendously complex and tremendously time-consuming. It often relied on custom bespoke algorithms, custom feature scorers, and a massive amount of training effort on behalf of people to train the system to do these jobs. But that's starting to be less the case now. We're starting to see general purpose AI algorithms and libraries and techniques that are good enough for more and more use cases. Things that just wouldn't have been viable or feasible even a few years before are possible now because of these advances, because the general purpose, generally available AI techniques and libraries and algorithms are suitable for a wider and wider range of use cases. And through advances both in hardware and software, like deep learning, for example, the amount of training that's needed and the amount of computing time needed to train these systems is reducing all the time. So projects are possible in a fraction of the time they used to take. And that's why you see things like this. Someone was able to take a more or less off-the-shelf, open source, freely available implementation of a recurrent neural net and trained it by giving it an example of every speech Barack Obama had ever given. And what he had was something that was able to generate at first glance, more or less plausible new Obama speech. Or using Google's, again, freely available TensorFlow library, someone was able to train it with the script of every episode of the old sitcom Friends, to the extent where it could generate a new script for a new episode of Friends. Now, these are fun and kind of silly examples of using machine intelligence, but this is very much my point. This is not reserved to hugely expensive, hugely time-consuming projects that need a massive amount of investment in new development. This stuff is starting to become more readily available to us. And general purpose algorithms and techniques are suitable for a much wider range of use cases. And that is what's enabling the hobbyists to do this kind of thing, but it's also what's enabling this stuff to be brought down into the consumer space and enabling devices like Google's Home and Amazon's Echo. And it's not just about the viability, it's also about how easy this stuff is. These two are my kids. They're aged 8 and 11. And this is a picture of them in February on a rainy afternoon in the half-term holidays. And they trained an AI system to play Guess Who with them. Now, this isn't using a Guess Who framework or a Guess Who kit or something specifically meant for this. This is taking a off-the-shelf, generally available in the cloud for developers to use AI service. And they used simple web-based tools to train it to recognize the different kinds of questions you get in a Guess Who game. And they trained it how to recognize the characteristics in photos of faces by giving it examples. They're aged 8 and 11, and in a few afternoons, they were able to get to a point where they trained an AI to play Guess Who against them. I'll give you another example. This is you can just about see down there. She's the daughter of a colleague of mine. And this is a sorting hat that she made with her dad. Harry Potter, you know, this idea of a hat that listens to you and then tells you what house you should be in the Harry Potter school. And she trained this to recognize, based on what you say, what house you should go in. Again, using simply generally available tools. This is what I mean by this stuff is getting easier to do, that even kids can start to pick it up and start playing with it. This isn't limited to the PhDs and the computer scientists nowadays. I've overrun my time, so I'm going to wrap up. I said I wanted to highlight 3 key points. Firstly, this stuff is getting smarter. Computers are getting better at understanding the meaning behind our questions and the meaning behind the documents that we produce every day. Secondly, advances in technology, advances in algorithms, advances in hardware are making projects that wouldn't have been viable a few years before really practical and really doable because of the reduction in the amount of time and effort needed to train systems to do these kinds of jobs. And thirdly, this stuff is getting easier. There are general purpose libraries and tools and packages around that you can start doing quite impressive projects with a minimum level of artificial intelligence expertise or skill. And I think these 3 things are going to have led us to where we are today and are going to transform what we see in the next few years. Thank you very much.
Hello, my name is Andy Wright. I'm going to start my presentation with a short story. I'm going to tell you about Deckley Fish. Deckley Fish is a small cooperative fishing company based down in Cornwall. You can look at their website. I spent a lot of time down in Cornwall, and I was there with my brother-in-law, and he introduced me to these 3 gentlemen. They have 3 boats that go out of Newlyn Harbour. They go out in the early morning and harvest their catch, lobster. And on the way back, he told me, and it's quite astounding, they tweet their catch. And often by the time they've landed it, they've already sold that catch themselves to restaurants in London and elsewhere. I found this an extraordinary story in that basically it demonstrates that we're actually living through a revolution which I would actually call the data revolution, or some people call the 4th industrial revolution, a revolution that's actually hits all parts of our society, including traditional industries such as fishing. It's a revolution actually about the availability of data, the ability to be able to communicate that data, and importantly, the ability to be able to assimilate that data and distill that down into advice and decisions. AI, robotics, and machine learning pivot actually around that capability. Although, in essence, they're different, the substantive aspect of those is their ability to be able to take that data and information and produce timely advice and timely decisions. What I actually want to argue today is that we're sitting through, and actually have been in, a data revolution, this revolution for quite a long time. And that as a nation, it's important that we actually embrace that and ensure that we don't stifle the innovation that's actually ongoing. I strongly believe that science and technology is a good thing, and that for countries and companies, and in particular actually as individuals ourselves, we should actually be embracing that. But importantly, to be able to do that properly, we need the appropriate legal frameworks and regulatory frameworks that allow us to actually understand actually how we reap the benefit from that point of view, but still, if you will, satisfy the social norms in terms of their use. I'm going to suggest here that basically the way to do that is to take a very applications perspective and actually look at the application of these algorithms and how we use them, rather than just the specific algorithms themselves. And importantly also say that industry, and in certain areas of industry that have been doing this for a long time, have a lot to say actually sort of from that point of view. So I said, we're living in that 4th industrial revolution. People are very familiar actually with the notion of big data and analytics, people looking at large levels of data, asking questions actually about that, whether it be my credit rating or actually doing other aspects, or whether, for instance, I'm sifting information coming into my computer using AI algorithms to remove malware or viruses. We've heard already the notion that AI and neural networks can be used for speech recognition. Google, Microsoft, Apple, and a number of other institutions are now talking about the intelligent personal assistant. But I actually, some of you, to cast your mind back and actually show here, one of the first examples of such a personal assistant. This is Microsoft's paperclip. It came out in Office 97, around about 2003. It was somewhat annoying. if you'd actually used it. But underlying this capability is a Bayesian network. And prior to, actually, I didn't want to do this live just in case it didn't work, but I actually asked my modern AI system, I use Siri actually on my iPhone, to ask and basically just say, hey Siri, tell me about Bayesian networks. It's intriguing. So what this system's doing, as we've already heard, is understanding my speech. The AI system's interpreting that in terms of certain words. The natural language system within that's recognizing this is a question about Bayesian networks, and then it's going away and searching, in this particular case, Wikipedia. And what it tells me is that a Bayesian network is an acyclic directed graph. Well, we actually won't worry actually about the technical detail actually about this, but it says it's a probabilistic method to basically link probabilistically symptoms of a disease with a disease in itself. In 2003, Microsoft adopted essentially technology that was originally actually being used for a medical diagnosis to provide an office assistant. And I would suggest quite clearly we've come a long, long way since that point. But the point I'm trying to make is that the algorithms, if you will, essentially are the same. They're different in terms of scale and different in terms of complexity. They're different in terms of the actual volume of data, but the mechanisms and actually the details actually that lie underneath them are the same. We talked about robotics, and people are very familiar, and Jonathan's already talked about that in terms of the Google car. I'll take us back a little bit further to the DARPA Grand Challenge. DARPA put a Grand Challenge, it ran twice in 2004 and 2005, and this was to take an autonomous vehicle out of the depths of the Nevada desert and for it to drive autonomously to LA. The winner of that was somewhat similar to this. It came out of Stanford, and eventually that Stanford vehicle eventually led to that Google car. And obviously now we're starting to sort of see some of these things talked actually in terms of commonplace. Down the bottom right, we have the pod, the Oxford University pod that's going to go into Milton Keynes. BAE Systems ourselves have now sold our autonomous land vehicle and given it to the University of West of England and University of Bristol, and it potentially will be running around the streets under the initiative that Jonathan talked about from the Chancellor on the streets of Bristol itself. But this belies the fact that autonomous automated cruise control, adaptive cruise control, lane following and adaptive braking are actually already in our vehicles. These are fruits from those original robotics capability that we talked about. Within my own domain, from a defence point of view, most people think about autonomous and unmanned aircraft. But really actually what I actually want to focus actually on today is that the modern fast jet has high levels of automation already actually embedded in that. A pilot in a fast jet has to be able to fly that jet. He has to be able to assimilate the information within that from a variety of different sensors, whether these sensors are on board the aircraft or actually off board, to communicate with other people on the ground, air traffic control, other people in the air, and at the same time make decisions in a very dynamic environment and very stressful conditions. The ability to be able to delegate to a computer tasks that computer can do much more effectively underlies a lot of those systems that sort of sit within these jets actually now. It provides and frees up the headspace for the operator to make decisions. The modern Typhoon jet in itself is often flying itself and managing those systems, providing the pilot the actual ability to be able to focus as the master tactician and actually making principled decisions actually around the mission that's in hand, that's being flown at that particular time. If I move on to other areas and think about mining and agriculture, Rio Tinto, since 2008, I've been investing and trialling at a commercial level autonomous trucks, autonomous drilling machines, and autonomous trains. The vehicle you can actually sort of see in the centre there is autonomous, has no driver. You can sort of see the size if you actually get closely because the ladder actually takes you up to the cab. The wheels actually on this vehicle, each tyre costs over $1 million US. So you can actually get an understanding of the scale. Rio Tinto now have over 69 of these vehicles, and to date they've actually covered over 4 million kilometres of driving in a fully autonomous way. In addition to that, Rio Tinto are looking to pass through regulation an autonomous train that will cover taking ore from the pit. The pit in itself, Pilbara, is around about 1,500 to 2,000 miles north, 2,000 kilometres north of Perth. From pit to port, over a network of 1,500 kilometres rail network in an autonomous way. And that's going forward for regulation now. The system itself, they claim, and actually demonstrate, is more efficient, it's safer, and increases the pit's productivity. It's more efficient because these systems work 24/7. It's also more efficient because without the driver in them, the kit is worn less. In other words, the trucks last longer because you haven't actually got a guy with a very heavy boot. They're more productive because of the ability to be able to bring all the information together, and then the mining operation mines less waste. So we live in an environment already where we're seeing the fruits of these systems, not just in terms of actually the social media sort of side of things, but in terms of real large engineering. And so it goes on. Greater availability of data, the Internet of Things, things you're wearing, enhance the volumes actually of information and data. Enhanced communication and greater broadband, our ability to be able to communicate that. And this leaves us to much more sophisticated machine learning systems that require the actual ability to be able to associate that vast and large amounts of data to make considered opinions and make decisions actually about that. Google DeepMind has been in the press recently, and underlying that is something called a deep learning neural network. But what was reported in the press was that, actually, I think it's Game 2, Mu 37, was reported in the press as it came from nowhere. It astonished aficionados of Go and the computer scientists actually within that. It produced a move that no one expected, or at that point, no one understood. It produced a move that basically those people expert in AlphaGo couldn't quite actually sort of get through their minds in terms of actually why it had done it. So it's an illustration in terms of where the power of actually some of these systems actually are going. We hear about machine learning bots providing recommendations for videos, the ability to be able to, if you will, tailor the advertising that you see on your TV based actually upon your viewing habits, or perhaps actually the way that you actually troll the internet. Credit rating in terms of the analysis of data, right the way through, as we've already seen, to medical diagnosis, perhaps actually using some of those Bayesian network ideas I talked about before. It's my strong belief, however, that these systems won't replace the human. I think that basically what we're talking about here is really looking at machine and human collaboration, augmenting, empowering the human to actually enable them to make bigger and better decisions in the same way that we actually already do, for instance, actually on a fast jet. Neither do I foresee the advent of the actual general purpose capability. I don't foresee the ability, for instance, of something that's been designed, a system that's designed to do AlphaGo, necessarily actually doing credit rating. The algorithms that lie underneath that may be common, but the applications are distinct. And from a defence and actually an industrial point of view, we're quite used to this. We're very used to building highly complex systems of layers within layers within layers actually of those systems of different algorithms, the combination of different sensors, and actually also understanding the role of the human within that system in a way that basically we can prove the safety criticality of these systems, their performance, and also, particularly, our adherence to certain legal frameworks. We call this taking a systems point of view, if you will. It's taking a holistic perspective actually on that, and we're not unique in this, and certainly actually the way that Rio Tinto look at this system are not particularly different from our point of view. I would advocate, therefore, as a community, we need to start thinking about how we actually think about outcome policy, actually a way that we actually think about the application and actually how we use these things from a regulatory point of view as being important. That's not necessarily an easy step. It's a step that as an industry, from a defence point of view, we're used to, but not necessarily actually everyone else actually sort of will be in the same. But however, whatever we're doing, I would suggest, whether that be in cyber or physical space, these systems that we're going to use are going to become ever more complex and integrated. And whether or not that algorithm, the same algorithm could be used for video suggestions or credit rating or an autonomous system requires a different approach depending on the particular algorithm itself. So, in conclusion, therefore, I think we're actually living and we're privileged to witness a tremendous revolution. A revolution, actually a profound change in terms of the application of machine learning, the ability to be able to take what is now actually available in terms of vast amounts of data coupled with inordinate actually capability in terms of compute power and communication, to provide enhanced capability that perhaps actually many years ago would only have been science fiction. At the same time, I don't see these systems as replacing the human within that, but importantly, actually, as a community and a society, we need to actually embrace that disruptive technology. That requires us to think about how we regulate and actually think about the frameworks actually around the algorithms in a way that basically doesn't stifle the innovation, but actually ensures that we actually meet those societal norms. I'd like to thank the Law Society for actually inviting us here and look forward to an interesting discussion at the end of today. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Can I first of all just echo exactly what you said there? Thank you. It's great that this event has been hosted. I've been coming to this building for 10 years now for various different events, going back to my admission ceremony 10 years ago. And I'd like to thank Jonathan for organising this event. I've never seen this room as full as it is today. Clearly, we need to be doing more events around technology and the law. And I would say that, given that I'm chair of the Law Society's Technology and Law Reference Group. But it's just great that everyone's come along here on a Tuesday evening to look at such an interesting subject as this in terms of artificial intelligence. Jonathan, in your presentation, you just started off sort of saying, you know, what makes a human, and you had the picture of the sort of fixings in there and talking about, well, what if, almost like the idea of the cyborg in terms of you've got nuts and bolts inside you. I hate to say it, you reminded me of my mother-in-law at that point, because she's covered with aluminium in both of her legs, and she's also visually impaired, so she's got these, actually an artificial cornea. So I'm pretty sure that in fact, this is my wife's idea, not me. She actually refers to my mother-in-law as the geriatric Terminator, because she can pretty much, we think that she sees the Matrix pretty much when she's looking at different things, which is slightly scary, but it makes Thanksgiving entertaining anyway. But certainly that sort of was a really interesting thought, and thank you for that. And Dale, it was really interesting with your presentation. You were looking at the idea of the sort of actually being able to get artificial intelligence to recreate a Friends script there, which was quite interesting. I'm pretty sure that they must use something similar for Game of Thrones, because it keeps bringing back the same characters with such regularity when you think they're dead, that you must think, well, surely this is something artificial coming up with this. Surely it's, you know, in terms of it being such a recycling almost similar ideas. But it never fails to entertain for those who saw it this week, certainly. I wanted to sort of take, and certainly if people are interested in seeing this, I've done this presentation on Prezi, so if you want to see the slides, they're available on my website, digitallawuk.com. But first of all, I just want to take a look at this quick attack map, if the guys can bring it up. This is, I'm told, a live cybersecurity attack map showing attacks as they take place around the world as we speak. This is why cyber attacks are, the figure, most recent figure I've heard, they cost $400 billion to businesses around the world every year. And the figure is always going up. I hope this is an accurate map. I'm sure that British Aerospace may be able to say if actually it's not accurate or not. But it gives us an idea just in terms of where some of these attacks can sometimes come from. So you can see here, attack origins. We've got the United States and China being responsible for a lot of attacks. If anyone ever saw War Games, you know, the Matthew Broderick film, it's a little bit like that almost, isn't it, with the idea of these attacks going back and forth. You always get different countries, and you can always take a look. If you take a look at norsecore.com and take a look at this map, if you want to see it in more detail, it always does give you a strong picture. I mean, all of these attacks here are due to the fact there's so much cloud storage capacity in the United States. Sometimes in terms of attack origin countries, sometimes the United Kingdom's in there. So at least we can say the UK is leading the world at something. But Unfortunately, we aren't showing this evening, so I suspect that's due to the football, perhaps, and people being otherwise engaged. But having said that, an awful lot of these attacks are automated. So it's the same technology behind the idea of, we were talking about Twitter bots earlier on, it's almost similar technology that's looking at automated attacks, looking at different systems, looking for vulnerabilities, so they can then find a vulnerability and exploit it. And it will then be an automated attack that follows, or it could be it's something more sophisticated with then, an actual a human will look at it and then start deciding to find out where the vulnerabilities are in that system and that network to really exploit it and cause the maximum amount of damage. And you might think, well, okay, that's just affecting things when it comes to servers and businesses and their data and data protection policies, and that's all I have to worry about. But as we've seen this evening, the implications of attacks like this suddenly become far more significant when all of these networks could be connected to things that are then in turn connected to things that are rather important. We've talked already about the idea of driverless cars. But in the same way, some cars that are not driverless can still be accessed online. I don't know if you've seen any of the Teslas, for example. Beautiful car. I was picked up by a driver with a Tesla in Stockholm late last year. Beautiful car. Picks you up. It goes from like 0 to 60 miles an hour in about 2.5 seconds or something crazy, because, of course, it's electric in terms of the motor, and it just goes like an absolute bat out of hell. Fantastic. My wife and I were just pressed back into the seat. Such was the acceleration that the driver took great delight in showing us. But then he described how the system worked in terms of the fact that his actual onboard GPS, rather than it being, for example, if you get in an Uber and there's usually a little device wired up, this was fully integrated into the dashboard. Nothing new there, you may think, apart from the fact that whole system could be accessed as well remotely. To the point that very often when this guy's driving around frequently during the day, his brother would decide to play a trick and open and close the windows or the sunroof on the vehicle to make sure he was still awake. So what, you may think? He found this a little bit embarrassing when he had one of the Swedish ministers of state in the back of the car, and his brother decides to start opening and closing the windows and opening and closing the sunroof. And of course, the driver can't even explain it, because he's like, well, actually, it's my brother just playing and having a trick, which was slightly embarrassing for him, but kind of shows that at that point, the driver is not in control of the vehicle. And who knows what the consequences of that could be. Does anyone in the room at all, as a matter of interest, watch Elementary, the slightly better, I feel, American version of Sherlock? Has anyone ever watched that? A few hands, good. Basically, that's Johnny Lee Miller as Sherlock rather than Benedict Cumberbatch. But they have been going now for a few seasons, and they had one episode in the most recent season that involved a vehicle that was actually remotely hacked for the purposes of then radically increasing the speed, shutting the doors, locking the steering wheel, crashing the car, and murdering the occupant. So at the point where this stuff starts passing into American culture, does this mean that indeed this technology is becoming something that we're now using regularly in our everyday lives, sometimes without even knowing it, and sometimes without even knowing the risks as a result? So you've seen there some of the damage from these constant things going on. Guys, can we go back to the presentation, please? Because what I wanted to briefly show you as well was the interesting world of social media exploitation. We've talked about the fact that sometimes you aren't necessarily communicating with a human being when you're on social media. You could be talking to a Twitter bot. We talked about the Microsoft system that sadly suddenly became very discriminatory after only a few days of actually talking to human beings, sadly. But how often does this happen overall? How many people, as a matter of interest in the room, are on LinkedIn? Of course, all your hands go up. You're all lawyers using LinkedIn because you want to get some work, if possible. Who knows, you might even get a job opportunity, depending on what comes through on LinkedIn. How many people have accepted on LinkedIn a connection request from someone that you've never met before? Be honest. Yes, a few hands go up. I have done that frequently. For reasons I'm about to show you, I don't do that anymore. This was a profile of a lady who tried to connect with me. You'll see there it says accept invitation. I didn't accept the connection. It says Jennifer Karen, director at Bank of America. And then I looked and thought, if you're a director at a Bank of America, wouldn't you have a fairly distinguished career that you might have wished to list in the profile, unless you were feeling particularly lackadaisical? But there was nothing there. It's so vague that I thought there's something not quite right on this. So I decided to Google the name, and I did a search on LinkedIn, and various information came back on different discussion boards, saying that this person was now posing as Jennifer Karen, director at Bank of America, and that various other people had been connected to this person as well. And what they would basically do was, of course, connect to you on LinkedIn. They'll be able to view all the information you may have shared on your LinkedIn profile. And think about that. A good LinkedIn profile, you'll have previous places that you've worked. You might even have places where you've lived. You might have your personal email address, your personal websites, Twitter accounts, other links, other data in there that could be used to build up a fairly sophisticated picture about you as an individual. Who knows? They could use that to work out what your passwords are. When you think the world's most common password is just that, password, it doesn't take a great leap of imagination to think that people might base a password on the building where they used to work or the address of the street where they used to live, which is very common in terms of things that people choose. So it suddenly starts being able to, if you connect to someone on LinkedIn that you don't know, they could be accessing all of that information. And indeed, it did turn out to be a LinkedIn scam, and that was all the information that I found. And once that person connects, not only can they see your information, they then try and get you to connect and send you an email, a message on LinkedIn that makes it look as though they're actually having a very familiar and normal conversation with you. But of course, if they've only just connected with you and they don't know you, well, how could they do that? But it's basically a slightly more sophisticated version of your typical phishing email that you might receive during the course of work. But let's have a look at something a bit more sophisticated. So this is a LinkedIn profile with plenty of information that someone's filled in. They say they're an assistant manager at a tech firm in Delhi in India. Lots of information in there, lots of contacts, seems perfectly reasonable. Until you go and check the image. Because it turns out that that person isn't a developer in India. When you then do a Google image search, it turns out there are loads of similar images here as well. And they don't work in New Delhi. They're actually a model in northern Cyprus. That's where the photo was picked up from. So that's just been taken from a modeling website agency somewhere. And indeed, you can see here there's sort of more information on this person's estimated net worth of $1 million, a Cypriot birth date 1992. They're certainly not supplementing that with work as a developer in New Delhi, from what I can tell. And there are more. I mean, you could go on with this. It becomes quite a fun game after you've realized this. You can then regularly, when you get a LinkedIn request from someone you don't know, just do a quick Google image search. I received this one. This time, they've made a point out of the fact that they're based in the UK. So it's actually the Union Jack in the background there. Full biography, fairly detailed profile, 338 connections, and a very Instagrammy looking photo in terms of the profile photo there. So I did another Google search, and it turns out they've got that photo from a modeling agency again. Surprise, surprise. It's a generic fashion photo. That person isn't, in fact, working as an SEO developer, as they would try and have you believe. So that kind of shows sometimes you can't be entirely sure who it is you're necessarily talking to online. I can recommend to you a really good book by a journalist, John Ronson, called So You've Been Publicly Shamed. And it talks about some of the issues in terms of communicating online, how some people's careers have been ruined through saying the wrong thing on social media. But it also talks about when a research team decided to set up on Twitter an automated bot called John Ronson, which John Ronson's friends then started to follow, thinking it was the real John Ronson, before it then started producing ream after ream of rubbish and rather nasty comments. So he actually got in touch with them and arranged a meeting to say, would you please kindly take this thing down? It's kind of ruining my reputation. And they said, oh, it's just an exercise just to see the impact of it. And it says, I'll tell you the impact of it. It's ruining my business. So it's a really good, I can certainly recommend that book to get more information on that. But then as we then look at artificial intelligence as a whole, excuse me, in terms of the way that then we have to face threats, we've talked a little about phishing, we've talked about social media exploitation. As this technology develops, of course, it then starts being used by different characters in terms of the threats and people that can then deliver a cyber attack, unfortunately. So therefore, the types of cyber attacks out there develop all the time. We looked at the attack map with automated attacks taking place. Very often that means that the volume of attacks then being received by different organizations for who their business is cybersecurity exponentially increases. Analysts increasingly find themselves sat there wading through reams and reams of sometimes false, meaningless chatter, meaningless attacks that won't actually cause any damage. They're just designed to distract them from where the actual real attack is taking place. Resources are spread increasingly thinly. That then means that it is easier for the real duplicitous attackers to get through the net. One example of this would be through the advanced, persistent denial-of-service attacks. Denial of service is when a system is bombarded with information. This could be an email address that receives a couple of 100,000 emails in the space of, say, 2 or 3 seconds. It could be a website that is suddenly subjected to a couple of million hits within a few seconds or so. When that happens, it's then enough for that system to collapse under the weight of inquiries. And then an attacker who knows what they're doing can get inside there and then cause damage to the system that is now available and ready for them to exploit. But the volume of these and the fact that they're now becoming increasingly automated becomes an increasing challenge then for the defenders to try and deal with. But increasingly then to defend them sometimes, it is then a matter of sometimes using artificial intelligence and machine-learned systems to try and defend these automated attacks. So you've almost sometimes got automated attacks coming through from the machines, and then the machines defending them to a certain extent as well. And now it's already to the point where increasingly you've now got the systems are being used to monitor and look at the information that comes in after the machines have tried to sift down some of the attacks so that they can then work out exactly what needs to be done to defend the systems that are then left. But indeed, it comes down to the point where resources will always be a problem. You know, the huge banks and organizations throw millions and millions of pounds at their security, and sometimes they are still hacked. So if a bank can get hacked, or an automobile corporation could be hacked, which would mean a car could end up being hacked, then what hope is there for the rest of us? And indeed, sometimes it just comes down to having the right measures in place, having the awareness, making sure that staff and those working and developing these sorts of systems can spot some of the flaws, spot the signs that could be there that the system is being exploited, that they can spot a social media profile that isn't entirely genuine, that they can spot a phishing email that shouldn't be used. And as awareness of these threats develops throughout the whole workforce, only then, really, what suddenly becomes a weak point in terms of staff suddenly not knowing what they should be dealing with can become a strength if people know what to do and can then properly raise the alarm to bring in the experts. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope that's been useful. Thank you very much indeed for listening. I'm really looking forward to the questions later on. If you have any questions for me, please feel free to tweet me this evening on @DigitalLawUK. And you'll be able to see, as I say, all that information on my website, which is www.digitallawuk.com. I always wonder how to finish these things. It always used to be the showbiz thing where you'd say, you know, thank you for listening. If you've enjoyed me half as much as I've enjoyed you, then that means I've enjoyed you twice as much as you've enjoyed me. I don't know if that works or not, but thank you very much indeed for listening, and I look forward to speaking to you later on. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you again to the Law Society for inviting me here this evening. So I'm feeling a little bit out of place because I'm a computer scientist. So I'm from the University of Liverpool. I work in the Department of Computer Science, and I conduct research in the area of artificial intelligence. And the main domain that I'm interested in applying AI techniques is the legal domain. So artificial intelligence and law is an area that I've been working in for well over a decade, but it's only really been the past couple of years that we've started to see media interest in the topic. So what I'd like to do is to provide you with some insights into some of the research that is going on in the academic world of AI and law. So I'd just like to begin by quoting some of the titles of some research papers that have appeared in the literature. So here's one: expert systems in law out of the research laboratory and into the marketplace. A lot of academic research sits in journals, in libraries, online now. How can we actually get those results from academia into the real world and being used by professionals in their everyday practice? That was the topic of that paper. Logic programming for large-scale applications in law. Many jobs, law in particular, people have to use logical reasoning. There are AI programming languages that are based on formal systems of logic. So this paper was looking at how we can use logic programming for applications in law, and in particular, large-scale ones. So third one that I've just picked out, the application of expert systems technology to case-based law, so looking at some particular topic. So they're all topics of papers that would sound relevant, I hope, for the legal profession today. It might be a surprise to hear that these are the titles of papers from the first International Conference on Artificial Intelligence and Law that was held in Boston, USA in 1987. So that was the first time that this conference had run. It has been run biennially since then, right up until this day. So you can see people have been thinking about these topics for over 3 decades. That first conference aimed to get people together who were interested in looking at how AI can be applied in the legal domain. Okay, so I'd just like to pick a few topics of interest to AI and law researchers and tell you a little bit about how these have been addressed within the community. First of all, something that AI and law researchers are interested in is baseball. So there's a famous legal case called Popov versus Hayashi that has been considered by a number of different researchers. My research team at the University of Liverpool has looked at this as well. And this was an interesting case because it was about who owned a record-breaking home run ball. So in the 2001 season, the San Francisco Giants player, Barry Bonds, hit a record-breaking ball into the crowd. Lots of people were there in the crowd waiting to catch the ball and hopefully sell it for a large amount of money. Mr. Popov was in the crowd. He stopped the forward motion of the ball with his glove. A mob then descended upon him and threw him to the ground. The ball got dislodged from his glove and he couldn't complete the catch. The ball was then retrieved by Mr. Hayashi, who found it on the floor and picked it up and claimed it. The case went to court to decide who owned that ball. So AI and law researchers have looked at how we can take the arguments that were present in that case and represent them in a computer program and see if we can replicate the same reasoning that the judge produced in the real case, and there has been success in that. So something else in case law that AI and law researchers are interested in. You might not think it from this picture, but this relates to the US trade secrets law. So there's a whole body of cases that have looked at trade secret misappropriation, and one of the cases in that whole body of case law was looking at a cocktail that was based on the Jack Daniels drink and whether somebody misappropriated the trade secret over that cocktail. And again, the case went to court. So people have looked at taking the whole US trade secrets domain and how we can take the factors that were present in the reasoning and have been articulated in the decisions and how we can represent those in a computer model such that, again, we can reason about these cases and come to a conclusion to see if the computer can replicate the same reasoning. Another area of interest for AI and law researchers has been something that's come to be known as the wild animals cases, and these are all about possession. So I believe that these cases are studied widely in the US by law students. So in particular, there's a case called Pearson versus Post that's about who owned a fox. There was somebody who was chasing a fox with the intent to capture and kill this fox. Before he'd actually managed to do that, another man, Pearson, came in, killed the fox, and then took it for his own. The case went to court, and it turned on all about possession. So is pursuit of the fox enough to claim possession or not? And the really interesting thing about this set of cases is that what people have looked at when they've been representing the reasoning is that they've tried to separate out the objective information, the facts of the case, from the subjective reasoning that happens when the cases are decided. So looking at the social interests that the judges are trying to promote by deciding one way or another, and looking how those social interests may change over time. So that has been a very fruitful area of research in AI and law, looking at how we can separate objective reasoning from subjective reasoning and capture that in a way that we think is appropriate and corresponds to the reasoning in the real cases. Okay, so I'd like to mention just a few research topics in AI and law that we see appearing in the proceedings of the conference and also in the journal associated with the area. So we've already heard about this from some of the other speakers, natural language processing. We've seen big leaps and bounds in AI in general over the last few years. Interacting with the assistants on your smartphone has become better and better. Clearly, that's something that's relevant for lawyers. There's lots of legal documents. How do we process those? Not just on the syntactic level, but by being able to extract semantic information, by being able to extract sentiment from those as well, perhaps. So there's a whole suite of natural language processing tools, and people are starting to look at how we can apply those in law. Knowledge representation. How do we take the messy real world, the arguments that go on in a court, for instance, and put them in a computer understandable language? Logic is one of the cornerstones of artificial intelligence research. So we need to be able to take the real world and turn it into one of these representations. Logic's not the only way. There are other ways as well. But we need to make sure that that adequately captures the knowledge. And this is the kind of thing that might go on behind the scenes of a tool that is intended for use in a particular domain. My own pet project is a particular research area called computational models of argument. I'm interested in the way we as humans argue about what to believe and what to do, and how we can write formal languages that capture arguments and how arguments attack one another, and reason about which arguments should be acceptable and why, and do that in a way in which we can turn that into a computer program. So my research is focused on developing these computational models and showing how they can be applicable in a variety of different domains in AI. But law is a very rich domain containing many arguments, so it's one in which there's been a lot of work applying these computational models. Machine learning, we've heard about, again, from some of the speakers. This is being applied in the legal domain as well. So everybody's swimming in data. We have all these big data problems. A lot of people have so much data they don't know what to do with it and don't even know how to begin to start to process it. So there are different machine learning approaches. How can we classify data into one category or another? How can we learn patterns, hidden patterns in data that we can't readily observe? And how can a machine learn from its past experiences? So that's been applied in the legal domain as well to deal with the large amounts of data. So if we're going to have these tools that are based on all these complex representation and reasoning mechanisms, we need some way for them to interact with the end users. If you, as lawyers, are going to be using tools, you want there to be sensible explanation facilities. You might want there to be nice visualizations at the front end of these tools. So we have to consider that as well. Okay, so how this all applies to real problems that are relevant for lawyers. So there are tools that are available for support in e-discovery. There's a vibrant e-discovery community that meets at the biennial AI and Law Conference. They look at how we can do intelligent information retrievable, how we can add machine learning into that. So we'll see more products coming onto the market that use these sophisticated technologies. Contract management, I already mentioned natural language processing. So the drafting of contracts, trying to extract information from them and reason about them, that's a natural application area for some of these AI techniques. Processing big data. I've had a number of law firms come and talk to me about the amount of data they have that they just don't know what to do with. It's happening in a number of different domains as well. So people want to know what we can do to try and process this and learn from it. There are algorithms out there that are well developed for doing this kind of processing. So getting our hands on that data and seeing what we can produce might give some insights to the professionals using these tools. Decision support tools, the tools that I mentioned that I'm interested in working on, where we capture arguments and we try and give some support for reasoning. Which way should we decide in this particular case? Should I take on this particular case? So if we could get some decision support tools that can process information we have already, that can do some learning over the data that's already input, it might be able to say, you have a very strong likelihood of winning this case, therefore you should take it on. So that's another type of tool where this technology could be used. Okay, so if you're interested in finding out more about what's going on in the artificial intelligence and law community, I would encourage you to look up our community and to get involved. I'm president of the International Association for AI and Law. At the conference, we have a lot of computer scientists, we have a few lawyers, and we'd love to get more lawyers involved, telling us what their problems are and investigating how these techniques from AI can be used to solve people's problems within their businesses. I mentioned the International Conference on Artificial Intelligence and Law that's held biennially. Last year, it was in San Diego. It travels all over the world. Lucky for you, it's coming to London next year. So that's going to be held at this time next year at King's College London, where there's research also going on AI and law. And there'll be some satellite events to try and engage some of the national law firms and any international parties wanting to come as well. Speaking about LinkedIn, in the previous talk, we have a group. The International Association for Artificial Intelligence and Law has a group. Come and look us up and join that group if you want to engage with us. There's all sorts of lively information on there about upcoming events and talks and flags on articles in the media. I look forward to taking your questions, and thank you for having me here this evening.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, perhaps you can just bear with us for a few moments. We're just having some seats put up here, and then we're going to have the question and answer session. Great, right, thank you. Well, thank you very much to everybody, to Dale, Andy, Peter and Katie for very different, very interesting, very thought-provoking discussions. And I hope that's going to give us a little while for questions and answers. We're running slightly late, so I hope you'll bear with me if we run over. We have a little time for some questions and answers. I think I'm right in saying there's some roving microphones around. Sorry, the lights are in my eyes, I can't see. Yes, there are 1 or 2 roving microphones. So if you have a question, please put your hand up. Wait for the microphone to come to you. The acoustics here mean that if you shout out, other people won't hear you. And we'll come to those. What I'd like to do, being technology-led, is start off with some questions we've had tweeted already. And the first of those is asking myself and the panel from Jennifer. Will paralegals and junior lawyers be replaced by robots? Which is a question clearly of interest to junior lawyers. Now, Peter, I think when you first came here 10 years ago, that was with involvement with the Junior Lawyers Division.
It was.
It was. Do you want to start off on that question?
Sure. Short answer, no, is my personal view. I've actually been engaged on quite a lot of work that the Law Society has been doing on trying to provide advice and guidance to those that are looking to innovate in the provision of legal services. And we put together a practice note on online legal services, which looks at where you can have the element of semi-automated legal services. So that looked at the issue where you might, for example, have a system where you could put in a few bits of information in a few boxes on a Sunday afternoon. Client presses a button, puts together a draft will, but it's semi-automated because then it would say, right, well, are you happy with this? The client goes, yes, happy with that. And then that will go off for a review via a human being. And that's the key thing. I think there's still going to be issues that will always have to be addressed by the human taking a quick look at it. You know, a human might know the searching questions to ask someone to find out about, you know, certain assets or issues that might not have been otherwise picked up, or that the individual might not have thought they needed to tell the machine in the first place. So I suppose the long answer to the quick question is, and coming back to the short answer, is no. I think you'll always need to have that element of human interaction, human control. So they will still need to train and have us doing the job to an extent. Whether they need as many of us is a slightly worrying thing, but there you go.
Anyone else want to come in?
I can have a go. I don't have a lot of knowledge or background in the law, but in terms of answering the general question of will knowledge workers be replaced by computers? In the short term, I don't think so. I think it will change what the role involves. It will change what the role is, but technology is evolving all of our roles and our jobs over time anyway. You know, there are jobs today that didn't exist 5, 10 years ago, so I don't see that as a bad thing. I would say I would expect it to broaden the role. Maybe it would allow them to use more evidence than they would have otherwise manually. It would allow them to use more information, to have a broader view, to have a wider view. But none of that is replacing them. It's just enabling them to be better, to be faster, to use more consideration in what they do.
Yeah, I think that's right. From my own experience, I qualified over 30 years ago when article clerks, as we then used to be called, would make the tea and deliver the post and go to the bank and so on. Now, no trainees do that anymore. The tasks which trainees have, which junior lawyers have evolved as businesses have evolved. And it seems to me this is part of that evolution in the way in which junior lawyers and indeed more senior lawyers will be able to be used and perhaps spend more of their time on the legal thinking rather than some of the more mundane things. Good. That's enough on that question. Let's move on to another one we had tweeted. This is one for Katie. Vicky asks, Katie, will a decision-making algorithm be as effective in dispensing justice as a senior judge?
Okay, so some of the research that we've been doing at the University of Liverpool has looked at whether our computer programs can replicate the reasoning that the judges go through in their cases. We've looked at a body of case law that covers 32 cases, and we have a 96% success rate at that. So there's one case that it got wrong. I'm not trained in law. It's not for me to say what's wrong with that case. But again, just to go back to what Dale said, I see this as a decision support tool. Yeah. So this is a tool to try and make the reasoning faster, more efficient and consistent, can assimilate data over time, so it will be there to support and help with the reasoning and not necessarily replace.
Lots of interesting possibilities to discuss. Of course, we don't know whether the judge was right or wrong in the first place. That itself might be subject to appeal. So some interesting possibilities. Or perhaps if you could get inside the artificial intelligence and change the algorithm, you could make the judgment different if you were really clever. Possibly. Yep. Who knows? Who knows? Can I take a question from the floor, if there is one? Must be some hands up. There's... I think that's Chrissy.
Yes, it
Chrissy,
is.
do introduce yourself, please.
Yes, Chrissy Lightfoot, author of The Naked Lawyer and tomorrow's Naked Lawyer, all about AI and robots. The question is really that we're sat in a group of solicitors, so I'm going to play devil's advocate here and state the obvious about support or replace lawyers anyway. The question I'd like to ask is a bit more far out, because we didn't really touch on it, because there is technology now where 80% of a lawyer's role could be done through automation, okay, cognitive computing and AI. So my question really is, how soon do you think that other 20% regarding the reasoning and judgment element that you touched on, David, do you think will actually come into pass?
That's an interesting question. How soon do we think? Andy, do you want to touch on that?
I think this is still quite a long way away. I think a lot of the applications we see are quite narrow. In other words, they're tailored to specific applications. And I don't know a lot of actually sort of in terms of actually the working judges, but I get the impression, although they may specialise, their remit is very broad. And I think it's really that interplay, actually the ability to be able to actually bring in thinking actually sort of from different areas to bear actually on a particular case. And so I think we're still quite a long way away from that. In terms of the use of these systems, the ability to be able to bring in other factors that one needs to consider, I think that's actually going to be there. But I can't sort of see these as providing that broad scope of actually of experience. What I would add is that one of the things I think as a community you probably do need to think about is are these systems remove in terms of the experience that one gains as you develop through your career? Because obviously that learned judge probably is actually sort of basing his judgment actually on tremendous level of experience in terms of all the actual previous cases actually and the issues actually they've dealt with.
It's an interesting point you've come on to. The development of common law, which is makes this the number one jurisdiction in the world, means that the law does move and adapt, as I mentioned in my words. If you're just replicating what's been done before, then it stagnates. Can I just go back on to perhaps challenge your question, Chrissy, about 80%? I'm not sure everyone would necessarily recognise that conjecture, but in Peter's example about making wills, I know from my own personal experience that it's not what clients tell you, it's what they don't tell you. Clients will ask you a certain set of questions, and it's only through a lot of knowledge and experience that you will know what other questions to ask them. Now, maybe those can learn, but sometimes they're picked up from, as I say, what people don't say, their body language, other experience that you have, that will be very hard to replicate. That sort of human intuition, which I think we're probably some distance away. And that goes in actually to questions of risk and liability, because as we saw in those instances of cancer diagnosis, if the diagnosis is better, that means the risk might be less, but we don't know yet whether the risk and liability for answering legal questions will be the same, and whether insurers would then be prepared to pick those up. So I think there are some other wider, interesting questions that might go on to tort liability.
Jonathan, could I just come back and challenge you back on that now?
It wouldn't be you, Chris, if you were.
It's just, well, obviously, I just want to share that you're absolutely right in everything you've said, but there is, you know, that's the whole point about the development of the steps from cognitive and AI to actual deep machine learning as such. But the point I'd like to make is that the reasoning and judgment, and even now, using algorithms and software where you can actually, a lawyer can brain dump their experience and knowledge into a software that actually starts that Q&A analysis and decision tree as it goes. Now, we've already got that technology available now. Some of the law firms and the switched-on lawyers are starting to use it. So, you know, to challenge back you, I don't think that you're absolutely right as in looking at what roles and how it shifts. But even at the top end where you've got seniors and partners that have got the experience, they can actually monetize and start using that now. So, you know, coming back to you, David, I don't think we're years or decades away. We're talking months and a series of small amount of years here as lawyers transit. So junior lawyers do have a serious question. What is our role? What's our skill set? What's our education? And do we need to leapfrog, go forward and skip a few years and start doing the stuff at the high end where we need to be mentored by the partners and seniors? And I think that's the kind of question I'd like to get to, because we can all sit here and you know, think it's years away. The point is it isn't.
Thank you. Do we have another question? Perhaps some junior lawyers in a minute. There's a gentleman, sorry, I can't see, a gentleman with his hand up over here. I think there's a gentleman over here after that.
Hello. My name is Brett Rowland. I'm afraid I have to agree with the lady over there. I understand that Baker and Hostetler in the US has now become the first law firm to use AI in providing advice. I'm not entirely familiar with the way it's going to happen, but I suspect it will be inputting some fact situations into the computer and an advice will come out. Now, the junior lawyer won't have to go and do that. The senior lawyer will just review it and send it out to the client. And, I mean, I agree. I'm very glad I'm towards the end of my career, because if I was starting, I would not see as many options for me as a junior lawyer. And one thing that I think the Law Society should be doing is addressing this and looking at the actual role for junior lawyers in the profession in the coming years, working out what they should be doing and how, and frankly trying to protect their involvement. Otherwise, you'll just have a whole lot of old people running around giving advice, and that'll be it. So, sorry, it's not a question, but it's more a commentary on that question.
A happy statement. Anyone want to comment on that? Peter. That's slightly unfair of me, but...
I think you're right. I mean, having said that, when I was involved in the Junior Lawyers Division 10 years ago, we were always looking at threats and issues that meant that it's always been a kind of an increasingly bleak outlook for the junior lawyer, sadly. So whereas the challenges a few years ago were reduced volumes of training contracts, now you're looking at, well, are there going to actually be the vacancies there? I would challenge you on one point there, though, where you're saying, well, it's just going to be the senior lawyer reviewing it. I'd argue actually it's going to be the junior fee earners that will increasingly start doing more sophisticated stuff, but it will mean the law firm can get away with just paying a cheaper individual to do that rather than paying increasingly more senior people to do it. So the demographic may not actually end up quite that way. It could be that actually more expensive personnel are suddenly jettisoned if they realise they can actually produce the same work using more junior people, and it'll cost less, because firms are always going to be looking at the bottom line, unfortunately. It's all about money. So it doesn't necessarily mean that you'd end up with particularly bottom-heavy or top-heavy structure.
I think the other point I'd like to make in our futures report, which is all available to see on our website, this is technology is one of those drivers for change, but actually there's a change in the demographic of the profession. Many, many more people are working in-house. Currently, I think 22% of our members work in-house. We think that's going to rise to somewhere around 30% in the not-too-distant future. So the range of opportunities for solicitors is much wider than it was before. I think we're tending to focus on what people do in private practice firms. There are a lot wider skills that can be used in many, many different ways. Perhaps maybe a way of more training in the future. There was a gentleman over here, I think, sir, had his hand up here next.
I have a microphone. I don't know
Oh,
whether
sorry, gentleman there, yes.
That
Sorry,
gives me
yes, indeed.
superior ability. Probably it does, doesn't it? My name is Stephen Townley. I'm not the youngest person in the room, probably, but I'm also not the oldest, which is reassuring. I have a statement and then I have a question. I see every change in the legal profession. I am a solicitor and have been for some years, but I've moved, in a sense, into other areas as well. Every threat is an opportunity. I was involved in a business that started in 2000 that did digital monitoring for the Sydney Olympics. And that business grew into something quite significant. It was an artificial intelligence type business that used web crawlers and various species of devices to track piracy around the world. It became a global business, and eventually it was acquired by Thomson Reuters. So I think this is a threat, but it's also a brilliant opportunity. And I only see opportunities arising as to how we deliver better value to clients, better service to clients, a better cost proposition to clients from the application of these sort of technologies. Now, my question moving on to that, to the panel, is are we, as a British profession, so conservative and slow off the ground that we won't seize these opportunities that exist? Because it troubles me that the ground is being captured by US companies, US law firms at the moment, not British firms.
Katie,
yes. So I can say so. At the AI and law conferences, they're international conferences and we do get people from all over the world. I'd love to see more involvement from British law firms in these conferences and looking to get on board with the technology and develop these applications.
Peter.
I just wanted to say on that, I think, sir, you're quite right. These changes do present an opportunity. All too often, unfortunately, I think the profession doesn't like the idea of change. It doesn't like the idea of having to change the way that it works and operates. I was really disappointed a few weeks back. I was talking to a junior lawyer who told me flat out, you will never see lawyers as innovators. We aren't innovators. We don't like change. And I was just so disappointed that someone at the outset of their professional experience had already got that view. I almost thought, is there something wrong with the way we're actually doing our training if people are getting that sense of negativity so early on? But sir, you're quite right that those that will prosper are those that look at these changes as opportunities and do something about it and exploit it, while everyone else is still looking at it somewhat fearfully.
I agree, thank you. Now, we haven't got terribly long for questions. There was a gentleman here who's been persistent with his hand, and I wanted to come to him next. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Michael Khojanuri. I've read Chrissy's excellent book, Tomorrow's Naked Lawyer, as well as knowing Brett and a few others. I was going to ask a similar question to both Chrissy and the point that Brett made, but sort of hearing what everyone said. I've been speaking to quite a few general counsel and in-house functions at different levels to find out what they, as users, are looking for. And as far as I can see, they're the ones who are actually, with all respect to all general counsel here, they're the ones causing the stagnation, not the law firms. They don't care how the service is delivered, as long as it's delivered fast, as long as it's delivered by people they like, and as long as it's delivered cost effectively. Now, obviously, AI, if it's going to come in from that angle without any real coordination and direction by the Law Society and the legislature, will essentially, in my opinion, I agree with both Chrissy and Richard Susskind, it's going to eliminate the need for junior lawyers because general counsel want to deal with the seniors. In-house law firms will want to deal with the senior lawyers, the high-value lawyers. And so the junior function, I think, it's just, let's say I'm wrong, but what if the junior function is being threatened and much more quickly than we think? Shouldn't the Law Society be thinking about how to train and introduce programs within universities and law schools to get junior lawyers ready for that possible change? And if it doesn't come about, then tackling what you said, they'll be more innovative, they'll be more technologically savvy, and they'll be more perhaps soft skill focused rather than purely technical, which is essentially what I think we're producing at the moment.
Thank you. Any? Want to add?
I mean, I would sort of share the earlier gentleman's optimism. I am a geek, so I'm eternally optimistic about what technology will enable. But I think you're right, that we need to be ready for it. The history of technology has shown transformation after transformation of industries. Look at, even leaving aside AI, look at photography. When Kodak was the king of the castle and everyone was taking film photos, jump forward to today, that's no longer the thing it was. Kodak are a fraction of the size that they used to be. They're no longer the dominant leader. But we're taking more photos every day than we ever did before. We're doing it in a different way. There are different players enabling it and controlling it. And the ones who are going to win are the ones who are ready for that shift. And I think you're right, that we need to be nimble enough and agile enough and ready to see how our roles need to change. And it comes back to what I was saying before. I don't think it's going to remove the need for us, but it will have us doing different things in different ways. And if we're not ready for that, whether that's at a sort of a country level or individual level, then yes, that's where we can get stuck.
Great. Well, I'm seeing lots of hands shooting up, and we've really only got a very few minutes left. There was a lady down here, who I think may be a junior lawyer. It's not impertinent of me to guess.
Yep. Hi, I'm Sam Choi, a trainee at Hogan Lovells, so probably one of the most junior lawyers here. Just on behalf of junior lawyers, we are aware of, I think, a lot of changes, and a lot of my friends are interested. And we understand that our roles may change. And to be completely honest, as a trainee lawyer, you have to do lots of mundane tasks, and I wouldn't mind it if the computer could do more of that for me. And my question, which is not very relevant to my statement, is how do you think AI legal systems can be funded and then actually monetized? Because what I see from my perspective of reading lots of articles on the topic is there's lots of interest from academics on how to apply AI technologies to the law. And then there's also law firms who are interested but also wary of being too on the front curve and then losing out when people then pounce on their development and getting their information taken out that way. So how can we get the funding and the monetization for these technologies?
That's an interesting, different question. I'm going to come to Andy on this, because I remember back to 30-odd years ago, people were starting to buy word processors, and firms would invest huge amounts of money in buying something which became obsolete very quickly. And now we learn in basic office technology, it's much cheaper and it's much higher turnover. Andy, what do you think?
Well, I'm so old enough to remember, actually, we've got a word processor and we shared it between 4 people. I think there's an interesting dialogue here, actually, in terms of some of the other things, that a number of professions have actually undergone quite a digital revolution in terms of the digitisation of their professions, whether that be architects, whether that be actually other professions actually themselves. And what we find actually within that is there's a whole service side of things in terms of the business models that work for these things. And I think it really comes back to the other gentleman over here. That's the opportunity. The opportunity is actually to provide those legal services, because the AI system that you will actually want to use will be different from the AI system that someone else will actually want to use. It will actually have to be qualified, certified, appropriate, to actually base its actually decisions actually on appropriate logic and appropriate knowledge that's appropriate either for the domain and for the particular service. So, and that's quite specialised. That requires a tremendous level of legal knowledge to set up that business. The business model that actually sort of results from that, do you actually sort of pay for a particular search? Do you actually pay a stipend or a service for that? I think there's actually a lot of stuff that's actually out there in terms of those service models. What does that mean in terms of different businesses? I think what it does is actually opens up, I would suggest, the legal fraternity to those service offerings that come from other areas. Well, that, it could be a Google legal service, it could be an IBM one for that matter. And certainly you see other industries being opened up in terms of what they would actually sort of traditionally actually sort of see as their business to actually other areas. I mean, banking's a very, very good example from the digital revolution. If one goes to Africa, there's something called M-Pesa. Basically, it's a mobile bank, mobile-based bank. It's, you know, banking is actually sort of being opened up actually sort of from this in terms of different models, and I think legal will be. And I think the opportunity here is to actually get your head actually around what those service offerings are and what works. I'm not sure if that answers the question.
Katie, do you want to come in on?
Yes, so from an academic point of view, I can talk about how we get our projects funded. So the government distributes money for research projects to UK research councils, and then researchers can apply it's a competitive process, can apply for funding for their projects. I've got a project part funded by Innovate UK with a law firm in the Northwest, and that is exactly to try and take the research out of academia and to solve a problem for a particular company. So we're marrying the two. There's some funding to get that going, and then hopefully once you've kickstarted the project and it's running and that knowledge is embedded within the company, they can run with it themselves. In particular, the government is very keen on emphasising the impact of academic research. So they want to see how the funding that's put into research is actually making changes within society, within SMEs. So the support through funding mechanisms for that, if you can identify appropriate collaborations, and then you can apply under these schemes.
Thank you. Very short on time. I'm going to take 2 points. So gentleman over here, and then I'll come to you for the last point. Sir.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm Adam Edwards from Wedlake Bell. 2 brief points. One is to say that with regard to the funding point, lots of law firms are limited liability partnerships or partnerships, and unfortunately our cost of capital is currently 47% and companies is 18 to 20. And so that encouraging law firms to invest, I think that's one of the things that the Chancellor and therefore the Law Society could do to influence that type of number. The other is to say that my understanding about machine learning is that if you take the lid off, if you like, if you were to cut the head open, you find that actually people don't understand what the machine is doing inside. It's half the point. You set it going, it learns for itself. So your Go machine, if you like, if you look inside, you can't actually interpret necessarily what it's doing, millions of lines of code. Does that not actually create a very real issue? It's very different from the algorithm we all understood that Google might have been using and that they've moved over to machine learning. That ultimately, when it comes to responsibility, going right back to your beginning question, responsibility, who's to blame, who's liable, and how do you manage these machines, that becomes a very real and challenging legal question going forwards.
And I think possibly for the solicitors who are advising the insurance companies who are insuring the solicitors, which is often how these things go around. Does anyone want to come in handy? Yeah.
I think particularly actually in terms of that last point, this is where it comes down to what's appropriate for the application, because there are different ways of actually sort of undertaking machine learning, some of which are more interpretable than others. And clearly for the particular application that you've got, it needs that body of knowledge to actually understand which method is most applicable given the actual level of interrogation that you actually want. So some of the methods are reasonably easy to interrogate. Some of the other methods actually are very, very difficult. You just need to choose the right one. It may limit what you can do, but at least then you can use it.
I think that is, it is a really important point. A lot of the work I've been doing is in healthcare, and a black box that spits out an answer of give them this drug with no more information is useless. No doctor is going to use that. In fact, what's more useful to them isn't that final finished diagnosis, but the evidence and the rationale that led to it. What they're interested in is, well, this paper and this article and this journal looks relevant to this patient, and this is why we think this is the right diagnosis or the right treatment. So that is a key element, and it's something that there's a lot of work being done on in terms of giving, like you say, some insight into why the processes are arriving at the answers that they do.
Great, thank you. And down here for the last point, before we see if the technology works and we can look at the results of the poll.
Hi, my name is Veronica. I'm a trainee solicitor at Gannon Solicitors, and I'm also the co-author of a book called The Proactionary Imperative, A Foundation for Transhumanism. So I'm very much interested in how technology can improve human condition. And this is one of the things I want to pick up on, which we haven't talked extensively about, which is the role of lawyers in actually shaping the future of technology. Because this whole debate, from my perspective, looked very reactive, as in lawyers respond to technology as opposed to creating it. Now, a lot of lawyers are legislators, and also lawyers partly create law, be it judges or in everyday practice. Now, it's worrying as a young lawyer to see how many legislative measures are put in place to actually stifle innovation, such as, for example, in the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union, there is what's known as the precautionary principle, which is a inherently anti-technology principle, enshrined at the very fundamental level of the European Union. Long story short, what do you think is the role of lawyers, people who are supposed to be leading in the society in the creation of technology and pushing it forward?
I thought you were getting onto Brexit there, but we'll move on quickly. Katie, do you want to?
Yes, so a lot of the developments in AI come from computer science researchers, but if we're going to move it out of the universities and out of the big companies and into the real world, we need engagement with end users. And I think most people involved in the development of this technology welcome end user input. So we can take our products out to the world and say, tell us how we apply them, but equally it can be a two-way dialogue as well. And we can say, okay, tell us what you want, tell us what's changing, what's relevant in your field. We don't have all the domain expertise on that, so please do come and engage. And I think, yes, there definitely is a role for it to be a two-way dialogue.
Great, okay. Well, I think on that note, I'm going to thank all our speakers and ask everybody to give them a big round of applause. Very interesting talks, and I hope some interesting points coming from the Q&A. Thank you to you also for the audience for being here. Now, I want to try and show you what the results of the poll were, and I'm hoping my colleagues here can put them up. Here we are. Actually, we need to move along, chaps, so we can see. Survey question 1, does your business use AI? Can everyone see those from here? Yes, not yet. Yes, no, and not yet. Not sure what I conclude from that. Possibly. We did discuss actually previously, didn't we, that people are using AI not realising that's what it is, a Siri on the iPhone. People don't realise that's AI, or if they're ordering things from Amazon. So AI is all around us. Let's move on to the second question. Will lawyers be replaced by robots? Yes, only 6%. No, 23%. And I hope not 11%. Okay, I'm not sure what conclusion to draw from that, but that's interesting. And survey question number 3. Could you be replaced by AI? Presume that's you as a lawyer in your job. Yes, only 14%. No, 67%. And not sure, 19%. Well, perhaps that's the one that will change if we come and do this in a year or 2 or 3's time, and we have the progress that you were referring to, Chrissy, that we might have a different view of. But very interesting. Thank you very much for participating in that. Gives us some awesome food for thought. There's going to be a video of this event, which will be available on our website and on YouTube in the next few days, so watch out for that. And I'd like to invite you all now to come downstairs to the reading room, I think, where you first came in, for a drinks reception. Please join us for a drink. Thank you for coming.